is a Birocolian of the class of 1981. After completing his bachelor's degree, 1987, I beg your pardon. After completing his bachelor's degree at the University of Boya, he proceeded to the University of Cape Town Law School in South Africa. He graduated with a PhD from Georgia State University and is currently the head of department at the Atlantic Metropolitan State in Georgia, USA. He is married and a father of 2 children who are here today. Doctor, we're pleased to have you in our midst. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful and marvelous academic reach. Your Excellencies, Reverend Fathers and Sisters, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Birocolians and alumni. Why are you here today? You may think the answer to that question is very simple. You're here because you were told that Birocol is 50 years old. Well, what if I were to tell you that Birocol is not 50 years old? It is 57 years old, so we are 7 years late. And I thought maybe the records were incorrect. So this morning when I got here, I picked up a copy of the Golden Jubilee magazine, and when I opened it up, I flipped to the list of classes, and I saw that the admission numbers for Birocol started in 1957 with the Holy Family Seminary in St. Joseph's College, Sase. So student number 1 was not admitted to Bishop Rogan College. He was admitted to the Holy Family Seminary in St. Joseph's College, Sase. Therefore, I may not have been wrong. But
that's Europe.
It's okay if we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Bishop Rogan College today. Perhaps we're celebrating the naming of this location. Thank you. Thank you, Father Popo.
One people, one power.
So, I was looking for something that I could compare this situation to it, in which we were celebrating something perhaps a little bit later, and I thought of an event that happened on the 11th of February in 1960 in what was known back then as British, Southern and Northern Cameroons. The people of those territories decided to vote to be reunited with their brothers in French Cameroon, and the other part voted to be reunited, or well, to be united with parts of northern Nigeria. Now, 50 years later, we often celebrate that particular historic event. They call it today Youth Day. Really, it is not Youth Day. It is the day we voted to be reunified. So, I'm bringing all these examples just to say that I may have to quote someone known as Justice Jackson, who said, "I see no reason why I should be consciously wrong today because I was unconsciously wrong yesterday." So we, the present generations of Birocolians, we cannot ignore the fact that we have brothers who went to the Holy Family Seminary. So today we have to remember them. And I think the best example of that is the presence of His Grace, Bishop Cornelius Eswa, whose name is listed in the roll of students who attended the Holy Family Seminary, which is the big brother of Bishop Rogan College. And I know that in the United States we had a big debate when we were welcoming Bishop George Akoh, whether we should call him the first bishop or we should call Bishop Cornelius Eswa the first. So, there's a reason why I'm bringing all these stories. Because the origin of Birocol is primarily a story that goes back to the time of creation. It it's a complex narrative, one in which some people might say we are concerned with semantics, we're concerned with dates, but perhaps in trying to unpack this narrative, there is more to it. We're looking at the essential questions of our times. For instance, what were the factors that prompted the Right Reverend Bishop Peter Rogan to move beyond a mere consideration to actually petitioning the Holy See for permission to open this preparatory minor seminary in a territory that had just become independent from the British and the French? More than likely, he was acting in the spirit of the Second Vatican Council document known as Ad Gentes, which specified the role of the priest or the clergy and the pilgrim nature of the church. The Right Reverend Peter Rogan was definitely a man of his time. He knew the winds of change were blowing across the continent. And just as the colonial masters of the United Nations were certifying that their protectorates were now capable of self-rule or were independent, or that at that time too the local church needed to prepare her sons and daughters to continue the work of the gospel in Africa. But perhaps that too is a false narrative. Perhaps it is, because the present generations of Africans who celebrate independence in Africa must never forget the fact that Africa had always been independent, and that the colonial period lasted for roughly only 80 years. Pretty soon Birocol will be older than that. There are some few exceptions, however. And we ought to also know that Africans were prominent players in the history of Christianity in the earliest years of the church. Yes, before the continent was conquered and fell under foreign rule, this continent was independent and had a history of Christianity. Colonial rule may not have lasted for a long time, but perhaps the effects are very present with us. So I keep going back to the issue of origins, primarily because it is not a matter just of dates or semantics. In fact, in unpacking this complex narrative, we are faced again with a complex question of our days. So let us go back to a period even before Bishop Peter Rogan. Let us go as far back as we possibly can to see why he did what he did, why he acted the way he did, to know why and how we too must act, and how those who come after us must act. In the opening of this institution, the church fathers knew that not all the boys who pass through here will become priests. As the saying goes, many are called, but few are chosen. While almost all of the students who may have come here at one point aspired for the holy priesthood, only a few made it, and we're proud to be in your midst. On an average, if Birocol admitted a class of 25 students, perhaps not more than 2 or 4 became priests. The prospect of the majority of his students not becoming priests in the end has been and could be perceived as a failure, especially when one considers the popular maxim, Ecce sacerdotes magnus est. To be a priest is great, or it is great and fabulous to be a priest. But this too may be a false narrative. Archbishop Wilton Gregory of the Atlanta Archdiocese, in a 2014 homily to the parents and family members of his priests and seminarians, stated that God has usually chosen and called people who are not always the most righteous. The Archbishop went forward to cite some examples, and he started with a man like David. And then he moved to Peter and talked about Paul. So perhaps the traditional approach that we have always used to define ourselves may be a little bit faulty. 50 years later, we may have to come up with a different set of criteria. It may be vain, therefore, for those who ended up as priests to think that they are morally superior or better. That's what the Archbishop said. It is seriously flawed as well for those alumni who did not become priests to think of themselves as failures or inadequate in the eyes of God. We are all sinners, whom God has chosen and called with specific talents to serve his people. We are all members of Christ's church. We need each other. It is perhaps for this reason that the motto of this institution was chosen as Dei Populo Servire, to serve the people of God. It did not say, my dear brothers and sisters, it did not say that to serve the people of God as clergy. It simply said to serve the people of God. So Bishops Rogan and Jules Peters were foresighted men who championed the creation of this elite institution to produce decent and morally upright men, whether as clergy or laity, to serve God's children in whatever talents or capacities they may have. So, Dei Populo Servire. Let's go back to that root word, servire. What does that word mean? To serve, thank you. And what does to serve mean? To the Mill Hill missionaries, like Bishop Jules Peters and Bishop Rogan, they understood the pilgrim nature of the church. It was not new to them. In fact, in service to the church, they traveled all the way to these parts of the world. And it is in honor and in continuation of that tradition that Bishop Rogan College was born. Therefore, a good yardstick or benchmark for us should be to measure how Bishop Rogan College and its alumni serve the people of God. Since God is the creator of all things, his people therefore must be defined very broadly. His people would include all men, women, and children of all races, ethnicities, religious backgrounds, or nations and nationalities. You would notice that I did not really define the meaning of the word servire, to serve, which comes from servire, the infinitive, from the verb I serve, which is servio or servio, depending on what part of the Atlantic you find yourself. So we are called to serve. We have an obligation to serve. To serve the people of God infers that they have been placed under our care or that they are our neighbors. And I had to look for a good example that could drive this point home. And the closest that I found, I'd like to borrow from an English case law, Donoghue versus Stevenson, in which the Chief Justice gave this example on the concept of the duty of care. In other words, if we have to serve, it means that we have a duty of care. We must take reasonable care to avoid acts or omissions that we can reasonably foresee would be likely to injure our neighbor. And he went on to ask, but who is our neighbor? The answer, it seems to be, he said, would be persons who are closely or directly affected by our acts, and that we ought to have them in mind when considering these acts or omissions. In other words, as Birocolians, we are called to serve, and we have to ensure that the people of God do not suffer any unreasonable acts of harm or loss to their spiritual or physical needs, because we have a duty of care to them. Obviously, there are differences between the legal and the religious components, but there are similarities. If we do not care for the people of God, we become negligent. The damages we shall pay shall not be in front of a court of law. We have a duty of care which creates responsibility for which there must be a remedy in the discharge of that duty. So it is in honor of that duty to serve without any boundaries that I would like for everyone here to please rise so that we can pay some moment of respect to all those who honored that tradition and made Bishop Rogan College possible, especially all the rectors who have gone before us, all the former alumni, and the others. So please rise. Thank you. May the souls of the faithful departed through the mercy of God rest in peace.
Amen.
Bishop Rogan College has a proud history of service and a rich pedigree as well. Started as part of the oldest secondary school in Cameroon, Birocol has for over a century, produced men who compose the best liturgical music, like we heard here today. Birocol alumni served the church in different capacities as priests and consecrated men. In fact, as we are aware, all the bishops at this provincial level are either products of Birocol or related to Birocol in one way or the other. Even His Lordship, Bishop Bushu, who is our current proprietor, although he's a Saban, taught in this college. And I know that some of his students are here present both as priests and as laymen. And I see some of them raising their hands. We know that there are also 2 other minor seminaries that have been created in the province, bringing a total number of 3. Those 2 seminaries or minor seminaries were created by men who were all trained in Birocol. The pioneer principals and education secretaries who managed the creation of those institutions are all Birocol products. The spirit of Birocol lives in those institutions. And we can firmly say that it is a testament of our motto that says, Dei Populo Servire. Or as the alumni put it, Servire sine fine. Service without any boundaries. Birocol alumni serve as priests beyond this ecclesiastical province. They serve in parts of Europe. They serve in North America, in the United States and Canada. They serve in other parts of Africa. They serve as priests. They serve as nurses, as bankers, as teachers, as policemen, pharmacists, engineers, physicians, and many more. So it is possible that Bishop Peter Rogan and Juice Peters may have foreseen the possibility of the alumni of this college going far and beyond. They said and they created a curriculum for this college which was second to none, and they appointed as rectors and priests men who were righteous and who were apt and who judiciously applied the standards for this school. That tradition has continued. The tradition of moral and academic excellence was continued and expanded under our first Cameroonian bishop of the diocese and proprietor of the college from 1973 to 2006, the late Reverend Bishop Pius Awa. It is therefore not surprising that products of Birocol are today serving both the local and the universal church as missionaries in the tradition that Bishop Peter Rogan and Juice Peters came here. Now, to understand how earth-shattering this information is, which we all know, but to put it in context, we have to go back again to the question of origins, a little bit before the time and way back before the time of Peter Rogan. It is not an accident that some people have called Christianity the white man's religion.